Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Consummate Athlete Podcast, where we talk all about performance, training, nutrition, and how to be a more well-rounded, smarter athlete. I'm Molly Herford. If you haven't been listening, you don't know that I am a writer. I write about all things fitness, nutrition, training, endurance sport related. And when not writing about them in books and articles, I'm probably outside doing most of those things.
And I'm Peter Glassford, Molly's co-host here on The Consummate Athlete. I'm an endurance coach and a registered kinesiologist. I help people ride bicycles mostly faster, but really off-road sort of disciplines and different adventures people get into. So, yeah.
Yeah, and right now we are in, I'd love to say sunny California, but the fact of the matter is it is actually raining sideways as we speak. But, I mean, considering what California's kind of had to deal with in the last couple of months, everyone that we've kind of heard talking about it is saying that the rain is much needed. So while it's, maybe not the most fun for riding or running in, it's, good to be getting some rain here.
Yeah, generally it's fairly predictable here. Today looks like it might indeed be sideways most of the day. But yes, you do need those days, and we've planned this fairly well with a rest day. We are shifting the podcast recording to when we were going to do some walking and get some groceries and sort of stack that activity and together time. But we're gonna make out. We're gonna make out here. Not make out with each other, although hopefully that happens at some point. But
this is getting like an explicit rating on the podcast all of a sudden.
But in fact, yeah, we're going to record this podcast. So today is a Q&A episode. We try and do these periodically, monthly or more frequently. And we have a few great questions from everyone who either they message Molly on Instagram or Twitter, or they use the contact form at consummateathlete.com.
Yeah, and we're doing more of these Q&A episodes. We've realized we actually really, A, enjoy doing them, and B, we get so many really good questions. So, keep the questions coming, and don't forget they can be, super specific, super weird, super out there. They don't all have to be, just sort of generic blanket training questions. Kind of the more specific, the better in some cases, for sure. Definitely the more fun to dive into sometimes.
Yeah, and these might be ones that you've sort of picked out of past episodes, and we can always sort of bug past guests, if not get them back on for a quick sort of blurb about something if you want a follow-up question or someone other than our opinions. We can definitely tap some of those people, and I'm sure they can get us some information again, if not get them back on the show even.
Yeah, and actually to that end, those of you who enjoyed last week's podcast with Lori Netescu, the registered dietitian and elite cyclist, we're actually going to be having her on more frequently to talk sports nutrition and just general nutrition for endurance athletes. So if you do have an endurance nutrition question, definitely let us know, because we're hoping to do a lot more of those, since that's kind of a big passion of mine, and I know a lot of people listening do really care about what they eat. They understand that that's a big part of making training go smoothly. It's certainly something I'm becoming more and more reminded of in these past few weeks of doing much bigger volume.
Yeah, and definitely if you do submit a question, the more information you can give us about yourself and your goals and stuff, that definitely helps, especially when we get into nutrition. Some of the stuff we can sort of talk generally, but nutrition for sure is one of those things that nothing's necessarily bad. It very much depends on who you are and what you're trying to do.
Definitely.
So without further ado, why don't we get into it?
Yeah. All right. Well, before we get into questions, let's talk. We've been trying to do this one thing on the podcast every week. We've been kind of remiss in it some weeks, but trying to remember to get it in there. So, Peter, what is the one thing you've been into this week?
Well, with everyone talking about resolutions and stuff, I was like, you know what? I'm going to have sardines every day for lunch.
I cannot roll my eyes more at this resolution.
I think if you haven't tried a decent quality sardine, it's worth trying. I prefer the ones in olive oil, but they have different ones you can get. And a good, I'm not going to cite any brands, but some of the better brands, definitely. I think if you compare it to whatever supplements you're taking, especially if you're on a fish oil bandwagon or omega-3 type stuff, Yeah, I think it's just a good source of protein. It's pretty portable. It's not the easiest thing to eat around other people because of the smell of sardines. But
Yeah, pro tip, please don't eat it in a van with someone else in the van.
but I just put it with some lettuce and some hot sauce, and away you go.
Yeah, I think we might even try it as a topping on the cauliflower corn pizza crust that we've been getting from Trader
Maybe
Joe's.
that'll be sort of like anchovies or
Yeah.
something. But yeah, I had it there during the camp. I was in the van usually while the athletes were riding, so I just sort of would bring that and a couple other sort of snacks, and it's pretty portable, sort of. And I just treat it almost like medicine. But I'll be honest, I enjoy it relatively. So we'll see. Like I said to Molly, I'm hoping that my coat and my skin and everything's going to be just glowing by the end of the month. I don't know if that'll happen, but why not?
I have no comment on this whatsoever. All right. My one thing, also food based this week. Because we're on the road, it's sort of annoying to end up getting a bunch of spices and like stocking a spice cabinet when you're only in a place for 3 weeks. But if you're in a place for 3 weeks, you kind of end up wanting to add some spice to your food that isn't just salt. I mean, I love salt, don't get me wrong.
Well, and I think the bigger thing is, any of these nutrition questions often are around weight loss or trying to eat, lower sugar or, these sort of things. And
Totally.
I think spices, especially good quality spices that haven't been sort of sitting in the cupboard forever, but, none of us are professional chefs unless you're a professional chef. And so some of these pre-made spices, I'm trying to think of the ones we had at home that we really liked.
Yeah, you really like the spice mixes.
There's like herbs de Provence, and then there was another one.
Is it like Italian
like a vegetable?
seasoning or
Yeah, I
something?
mean, you pick what you like, but some of those things, you can put them on egg, you can put them on different meats, and some of them you lose the the gamble. Some of them you're like, wow, this is a completely different meal, right? And so if you have one or two or three of these, we'll call them miscellaneous spice mixes. It can be quite a game changer, right? If you're just having, chicken and broccoli every day.
Yeah,
Hopefully you're having more
definitely.
variety than that. But, ultimately a lot of our meals are sort of beef, sweet potato, and coconut. We often joke. And, if you go curry sauce one night and some spices or something.
Yeah, so the one I've been particularly into this week, we got the Trader Joe's just everyday spice mix. And it's a range of the most generic spices that you could possibly imagine, right? It's, salt, pepper, chili, garlic, onion. So kind of your standard ones that you'd normally have at home as separate ones, but we obviously don't have them all here at this Airbnb we're staying in. So it's just sort of a nice little mix. It's got its own grinder attached to it, and it was like $2. So it's been a good one to just have and put on, everything: potatoes, eggs, veggies.
So we've done our morning scramble with that, and then not done it with it. And then we've done like a fish maybe with it. And then I think we tried it maybe on we do like a baked, the sweet potatoes almost as like fries in the oven. So we chop them up, some oil, and then a bit of that seasoning, and it's a whole different dish.
It's pretty impressive how much a spice can change food. And I feel like there are a lot of you that are going to be like, yeah, duh. But if you're like us and you're used to just kind of throwing 3 things in a pot or in the oven or whatever and calling it, good with the meal, honestly, a lot of the time we don't think of spices. So for me,
and again,
this is a
I
big
think
deal.
if your New Year's resolution was around weight, right? Like rather than doing, I don't know, a tomato sauce or ketchup or something like that, certainly you may not even have to cut that out, but you could certainly, ketchup one day, no ketchup the next day, and then use like a spice mix that's essentially 0 calorie.
Well, let's not talk crazy about getting rid of ketchup.
I didn't say get rid of. I'm just saying you're going to cycle this a little bit more, right?
I mean, I'll say it's made me use less ketchup. That's one of my, I think, major food indulgences, which is really lame, is probably ketchup. It's one of my favorite things.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a little crazy about condiments in general. I don't like when they overrun the door of the fridge, and that's an aside. But I think there's a lot of hidden calories between that and like the juices and stuff, right? And it's definitely one of those things that I think you could cut out relatively painlessly. And one of the tools to do that would be like a spice, for sure. Spices and salts, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's actually pretty funny if you think about like the low carb, and I realize we're getting really tangenty with spices here, but with like going low carb or any of that stuff, it is shocking how many carbs ketchup actually adds to your eggs and stuff. It's pretty much just carbohydrate. It's sugar and tomato paste. So it's one of the worst offenders, I'm going to say, as far as hidden sources of carbohydrates and calories in your food. And because it's more of a savory thing, you don't think of it as being high sugar, but it totally is.
Yeah, and I mean, there's subs. This is a tangent, but I think that's the point of the one thing question. Things like hot sauce, right? Like there's definitely like other subs there, right? You could do spices one day and more of like a hot sauce or mustard. Mustard tends to be lower calorie, lower sugar as well.
Or even just like a homemade salsa. Like I'm very big on just chopping tomatoes,
Sure.
adding cilantro and lime juice.
Anything
and salt.
you make, honestly,
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah, so that's a good one. Did you want to parlay that into nutrition, or where did you want to go on the first question?
Well, I think that actually kind of lends itself to talking about dun 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 the keto diet. Now, if you listen to last week's episode, you know we've gotten into it before and we've talked about kind of the nutritional side of it. But it is the new year, so that means there are going to be a fair amount of people that are going to be trying the keto diet, whether like for better or for worse.
It was big in 2018. I'm hoping there's something new in 2019.
No, I've seen so many articles in this past week about like keeping with your keto resolution. It's been pretty big, we'll say. So while I have mixed feelings about the actual keto diet itself, if you are going to do it, I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about it in terms of training and just kind of a couple reminders about it, I guess. So Peter, when you have clients that are coming to you and saying, I want to try keto for the new year, what's your kind of go-to response?
I mean, it's like I say, it's becoming a common question, and I think it's maybe good. I mean, I think as adults, a lot of us, most of my clients are busy adults with families and jobs, and we're all aging. And I think some awareness.
You're aging.
Some awareness around carbohydrate and sugar and processed foods is good. I think a lot of times we're too quick to jump to the extremes, which is what a ketosis diet would be. A lot of us could benefit from reducing carbohydrate, whether that's in a sort of systemized or periodized fashion. So during maybe a base phase, which we talked about in one of the last podcasts, sort of your general preparation when the intensity isn't as high, you're not in race season, certainly reducing carbohydrate and reducing things like the ketchups that we were just talking about and stuff, right? And we don't need to be eating candy all the time or pop or juice. There's lots of these sources of carbohydrate that are relatively processed that we could pull out and probably see some benefit, whether that's in weight loss or performance. And, endurance performance is certainly based around utilizing fat. The one thing that I keep trying to remind people is that we all want that magic thing, right? And that has not been shown with ketosis or a low carb diet. There's been enhanced fat utilization shown. And I do think that we're going to see a revolution of sorts in some of the like ultra distance stuff where you can't get support. So crossing Antarctica. So if you're crossing Antarctica, there's probably some performance to be gained.
Yes, the many of you listening that are planning an Antarctic crossing.
Yeah, and I mean, we're looking at like our Killarney sort of thing, and I am curious about it for things like that where you got like we're talking into the long, so even just say over, say 6 hours type thing, where you can't refuel easily. I think there is going to be some revolution in that sort of time span.
You can pry the Snickers from my cold, dead hands. Just putting it out there as far as the Killarney Trail goes.
Right. But I think for a lot of people, we're missing, if your heart rate tends to run pretty high, that's usually a good sign. You can ride all day at like 180 beats or something. There's probably just some benefit from just, MAF training or just basic endurance training where you're actually riding at a low heart rate and increasing your fat utilization, right? If you read any of the Joe Friel manuals, or like a side effect of endurance training is you become better at using fat. Any elite endurance athlete is very good at using fat. So the question is, how do you get there? And is the only way to get there by ketosis and this very extreme? And I think, to sum it up, I guess, that I think most of us could just improve our diet and be moderate and then train more effectively and see a huge improvement. And then if you didn't, then that would be where, you know, I would pursue someone more skilled in nutrition and certified nutrition than me, or probably you, to help you do ketosis and try that, because it may very well be something that's very helpful.
Yeah, for sure. And this might be a pretty blanket statement, but usually the people who are talking about going keto aren't the ones that are on the whole food, already like kind of low carb diet. It's not like going keto is like a 10% shift in their diet. It's like a huge overhaul of their diet.
That's certainly been, for the most part, what I've seen. You know, and again, we're seeing people at the high level, some really cool interventions for the peak, like 1% of athletes, where we're doing periodized nutrition, we're doing fasted workouts, we're doing, you know, periods of the year maybe where someone is dipping into ketosis, and that's certainly being done. But this is being done with the support of like professionals who like have studied this and are monitoring this, right? And I think it's very risky to go into that sort of stuff and again ignore the foundations of good nutrition and good training, which is, you know, the base of our pyramid of performance and health and wellness and being a human.
So I had an amazing conversation with Swain Tuft, the pro cyclist. He's 41. He's been racing for years.
Olympic medalist.
Yeah, he's done the Giro d'Italia 8 times. He's raced the Tour. He's still racing at 41. And like, we have to get him on this podcast because his morning routine is amazing and I love him. But one of the things that he was saying about younger athletes these days, we got a little grumpy as we were doing an interview for Flow Bikes and another one for Canadian Cycling Magazine. We talked about the fact that so many young athletes are going for these, you know, quote unquote marginal gains. They're doing all these things that are supposed to improve performance by 1%. And, you know, taking XYZ supplement or doing XYZ interval or using, you know, whatever recovery tool, like that one that like is like a hammer.
That kind of stuff. Everyone has an altitude 10 and those boots that compress their legs.
Yeah. So everyone's doing all of that, but they're not hitting the
Endurance
90%.
training.
Yeah, the actual 90%. So it's like, okay, great, we're at 15%. And we've, as Swain put it, we used up all of our marginal gains and we're only at 20%. We've forgotten the actual, you know, 90% that makes up the base. So just kind of keep coming back to that. Also, for anyone who's interested, Swain is at training camp, so he's riding hours a day. He wakes up, he does a run on the beach, then he does some yoga, then he jumps in the freezing cold Pacific Ocean, gets out, does some crawling around on the big rocks on the beach, does a couple more stretches, and heads home for breakfast. He's the oldest one on the team by, I think, 10 years, and he gets back and everyone else is still asleep. The man is a legend.
Yeah, and I don't know what to say. I mean, that's like typical old guy stuff, right? And I think I changed my tune because I was like sort of lamenting the same thing. You know, the kids they're not doing it right. But then I read this cross country ski book that I really love. Reread it, and there's like just the guy in it, one of the famous cross country skiers. He is lamenting about the youth and how they're not training as hard as he did in his youth and so forth. But this is like written in like the 90s, I think is when he wrote it. And so he's lamenting about in the 90s, right? And so it's like there's a whole like Swain, was a very young man. He was potentially in a different sport, but doing a, you know, not doing enough by the older generation's measure. So
yes, and we walked
tough.
10 miles to school in our bare feet.
Yeah.
Uphill both ways.
So I don't know where we're going with the Swain Tuff, but it's
you
need to take care of the foundations, right? And it's boring. It's the boring stuff. It's, you know, vegetables and protein and going to sleep on time.
Yeah.
And it's boring, but I mean, it's the stuff that seems to stay through time, right?
Yeah. And then one last kind of point about keto, and I don't know if we talked about it in last week's episode, but Lori was actually mentioning it on her Instagram, and it reminded me. A lot of people mistake keto for low carb, and they either accidentally or purposefully keep their protein intake still quite high. But a keto diet is not actually a high fat, high protein diet.
Yeah, you have to watch protein because it can be used, right? Blanking on the name of the term.
Nucleogenesis?
No, gluconeogenesis
I was
is when
close.
protein is can be used as carbohydrate. So you do have to be wary of that if you're aiming to go into ketosis. And there's a range there for sure, and it's somewhat based on how much you've done it. But as a base blanket, like again, these are sort of the common sense things that you see. Not common sense things, sorry, but the common things you see people who, see that on Instagram or Pinterest and then they go and do it without the help. And that's what I'm saying. Like there's all these like tripping points around salts and the amount of protein you can have and stuff like that. That someone who's a professional at this would need to help you with, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, and there's also, I should say, there's like a very sneaky like window there, and this is, I think, where a lot of athletes, and I would say that unintentionally I ended up in this when I was toying with the paleo diet early 10 years ago, and I've since, like, I still follow that as sort of my framework, but there's a weird window there where you're not low enough and on carbohydrate and maybe not high enough on fat, but you're sort of having some carbohydrate, and you're sort of in this middle ground where you're not getting the benefit of the very low carbohydrate diet, but you're also not getting enough carbohydrate. And I think there's a lot of people sort of in that sneaky window. Mm-hmm. But all that to say, most people could just probably lower their carbohydrate because they're eating a fair bit.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, moving on from keto. We had one question from Caitlin. She's looking for ways to incorporate exercise when working long hours in a city. She has a new job and it's hitting her hard. And I think pretty much anyone listening can definitely relate to that. I think we all go through seasons in our life where, the hashtag hustle of, what's actually going on in our life is going to impact our training in a very negative way. But obviously, there are some tried and true ways to keep that going.
Do we have an age or a goal?
No goal. I'd say she's close-ish in age to me, kind of similar level to me, we'll say. So reasonably endurance trained, pretty fit.
Right.
And we'll say the goal here is to stay in like race-ish ready shape.
Because I guess that's the ultimate question, right? Like sometimes in life we have to hustle for a bit, and so then that's where you sort of pull the nutrition in, and you just keep things as clean as you can, get to bed on time, and you walk as much as you can to work, and you just sort of don't worry about the athletics if there's not a goal there for a while, right?
That's true. Good nutrition can really like solve a lot of
Yeah, I mean, it helps
issues.
if you can control body composition and just make sure your energy and that you're walking and taking the stairs and these things. Like, you can be a pretty regularly fit, and healthy person. And then that's a base of support that then come the summer, if, you figure out work and you're sort of settled down, then, this is essentially periodization. You have sort of like this off period where you're focused on other things. And then, once work chills out, you can get back into cycling or running or whatever you're into, right?
Totally. I think a big mistake people make here is starting to do that. Like, okay, well, I'm working 10 hours a day. I'm going to now get up at 4 a.m. and hit the gym or hit like the 5 a.m. spin class or whatever, and not cut down on sleep in order to do that. And,
sure.
Then you start ending up supplementing during the day with sugar and caffeine to keep you going, all for the sake of getting in these workouts that are kind of ultimately costing you instead of actually benefiting you.
Yeah, and I think ideally, like, again, we say that walking almost in passing, but I think that the more you can, like, I have several friends who are quite healthy. They eat, reasonable portions. They have vegetables and protein at every meal. They have a few meals a day. They don't necessarily skip any meals, but they're walking, and they walk very quickly, I have to say. Like, I've gotten much better at walking in the last few years with the amount we've done, but geez, they walk so fast in the city. The city people are just walking. But they walk vigorously, and that's basically their main workout is 5 days a week. They walk, and my one friend walks like, I think it might be half an hour each way, like vigorously. I don't know why I'm emphasizing
Vigorously.
but it's important, right? I think so. So that's that's an hour of walking, and I don't know what happens on lunch. They probably walk somewhere at lunch too, and they divide that up, right? And that's a good base. And then maybe on the weekend you go again, maybe just walking to the market and going to see a friend and going walking for coffee. I think that's a good base, right? And I mean, we would maybe say, throw some morning yoga or anywhere core in there for 10 minutes at some point, morning or in the evening. Even a few times a week, just to get a bit of sort of body weight conditioning, calisthenics.
Yeah. And I mean, if you have a good indoor setup, and I'm actually working on an article for bicycling right now about the perfect indoor trainer setup, and it reminded me for cycling. Yeah. But I mean, you could do the same with treadmill or gym setup, whatever. Having just that small space in your apartment or house or whatever that's always set up, so you can, literally come home from work, put on your chamois, jump on the bike. It's already on the trainer. You don't have to do any kind of setup. You don't have to, make room or clear a path or anything. You can do a fairly good workout in half an hour. I mean, Tabata intervals, 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off. Like, you can crush, a really good workout pretty quick.
I think almost in relation to what we were just talking about, right? Like, I think you may not have a ton of motivation right now too. So, I mean, I think even half an hour of just aerobic exercise, right? Like, I don't think it has to be super hard either. And that could be part of an overall plan too, right? Like a month of 30-minute workouts and just see what happens. And maybe you get one longer workout on the weekend, or you get outside on the weekend. There's lots of people that, are quote unquote weekend warriors, right? So I don't think that's a big deal either. If cycling or running is part of what you want to do, it might just mean shortening down what you think is what you should be doing, right? I think there's always that should statement is always the one we want to sort of assess, right? If you're saying you should do this amount of workouts or should do this amount of intensity, like why? Like, are there reasons why you should not be doing that, right? Well, if you're hustling really hard at work, it might be that you need to back off, right?
Yeah, definitely.
I was thinking the other thing too, if at work often, several clients have, we find out they have a gym or something, right? And they're not using it at work, and they could be going at lunch for a quick 30-minute strength workout.
Yeah, you can actually not get that sweaty and do a really good strength workout.
I mean, sometimes there's a shower too, right? But yes, for sure, you potentially could do something. And the other thought I had was like run commuting. If you're a runner, it's a no-brainer. If you have to build up to it, then it might be sort of a walk to start and then a run walk or whatever, subway part of the way and then walk or run. But I think you can do that. Run commuting is really simple, and certainly bike commuting is another option if you have facility to lock up bikes or whatever.
Yeah, definitely.
But that gets overlooked often too as something that you can incorporate. And then on Friday, maybe you bring a bit more stuff, and on the way home you can extend that into a bigger ride, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I mean, we all know there's ways around it. I think the biggest thing is to not end up going so far overboard trying to squeeze it in when, like we said, you got to settle into your new job, and it, probably will calm down and get easier, and you'll start figuring out these things, but not panicking about, oh my gosh, I need to do it right now or all is lost.
I really like your 30-minute thought though. Like, I think, again, we only know so much. What was her name? Caitlin?
Yeah.
About Caitlin. But, I think I see that pattern that like 30 minutes isn't a workout. It needs to be an hour. It needs to be 90 minutes. And so I've actually, in this latest block for a lot of clients, I've actually added a few 30-minute just recovery spins to try and increase the frequency, like how many times they're on their bike, but also just enforce like this is easy, like this is an easy workout.
Well, and even my coach is doing that with me as I'm trying to recover my knee from, fairly minor tendonitis that just won't seem to go away. It's been a ton of like, okay, you've got a 20-minute run today. You've got a 30-minute run today. And at first it drove me crazy because I'm like, no, I'm a runner. 20 minutes isn't a run.
Right.
But I'm coming around to it.
Yeah, definitely a big thing for coming back from injury for sure is increase with runners especially, but increasing frequency, but then decreasing duration. And I've talked about before just that frequency piece. I think is something that people overlook. The advanced or the very serious athletes don't look at double days and triple days as much as maybe we should, especially in cycling. But the quote unquote everyday folks just can get so much better just by adding one other workout or two other workouts that would be even a half-hour spin, right? A commute to work.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I stand by the 15 minutes of core in the morning is almost 2 hours a week of core, which is 100 hours of training a year.
Sure. Yeah, that adds up quick.
Like, and when you're talking about, pros are training, doing 1,000-hour training year, or 1,000 hours of training per year, that's like at the, top Olympic level. If I can crush through 100 hours of training without even noticing it, that's pretty sweet.
Yeah, I haven't seen, we've talked about this before too, that 10 minutes in the morning of yoga or core. I tend to go more with the core, and you're more on the sort of yoga side of things, but calisthenics, and definitely that I haven't seen that amount of, I guess, success in people like adhering to things as that with strength specifically, I guess. But
you mean like you actually have clients that are doing it and enjoying it, and it's giving them
enjoyment.
Progress.
I guess we can go as far as enjoyment, but I think completing that, right? And you're seeing cyclists doing some sort of strength or off bicycle activity for like the whole year, right? Never would you get someone to go to the gym twice a week and do a 30-minute workout. It never happened.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the fact that it can be done anywhere, and again, like we've talked about my pull-ups, especially when we're home and I can actually use my pull-up bar, but push-ups and stuff, just going from minimal to being able to maintain, 20 to 30 in one shot pretty much whenever, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So. Okay, so this next question is one that I find kind of very frustrating for me, or one that I struggle with too.
Sure.
Fatigue versus laziness. Like, are you actually fatigued, or are you just kind of feeling blah?
It's an interesting question.
Because they kind of mean the same thing, but, how do you tell when it's physical fatigue versus just an emotional ennui?
I mean, I was trying to think of a simple, like, yes, no type way to go about this, but I guess if you're lazy...
And lazy's relative here. Like, I mean, we're not talking, are you eating Doritos on the couch 8 hours a day? But
I don't know. Like, if someone's getting on their bicycle or on, going to do a workout, then I don't see that being lazy. Right? So I would then ask, like, okay, well, if you're doing, like, I guess you're saying, like, so you're like classic endurance athlete, you just hate doing intervals?
Okay, I'll give you an example from real life. Yesterday, I was on the bike, and, I've been riding with the girls at the camp the last couple weeks. This was one of my first longer solo rides. And I was a couple hours in, and I just felt so meh. Like, I actually almost turned around and rode home instead of finishing the loop, because I was just so not into it. And I couldn't tell if I was legitimately fatigued or if I was just kind of in like a state of not being particularly into the ride at that moment. But everything felt very heavy and tired. But I couldn't tell if that was an actual feeling or if that was just my brain kind of shutting down on me.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's several factors there.
Diagnose me.
I would look first at, like, if there's any intensity in the schedule, then how is that going? Because that's usually a good tell of fatigue. If someone's just lagging in their intensity workouts, then there's probably something either nutritionally or, they're not recovering well enough, or there's too much volume, or not enough time between workouts. Another thing is, like, if every workout's very similar, which is common. So, like, every working person does 1 hour moderately hard as their workout. And in principle, you would like to have a longer workout, say 90 minutes to 3 hours, depending on your sport and what you're trying to do. But I see a lot of people are missing that, like, long workout. For cycling, it's probably more like 3 hours, which is hard for sure. If you're a busy person or if you're, in a winter climate. But at some point, those sort of need to be done. And for most distances, that would be sort of a minimum, like, not overtraining, but like over distance training. or endurance workout. So I would just want to see that there's a hard workout in the week, there's a long workout in the week, there's maybe one of those recovery spins in the week. There's some variety in the intensity and duration. And so if you're going sort of stale often, it's like every workout's the same. And that both motivationally and energetically is very tough, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I'll also add, like, I was then able to, at the end of the ride, keep up with you and be pushing good power. So it was definitely more of a mental thing in this case. But
Right.
like last week, I know I was particularly fatigued. What about as in terms of like heart rate, breathing, any feeling in the legs that would indicate actual fatigue versus needing
Yeah, I
to
think
change
once
up
you
stuff?
get warmed up, whether that's with some sort of like coordination or just, sometimes it takes sort of half an hour to even 60 minutes to get warmed up. If you're still like feeling like blah, like just that sensation that like your legs are heavy or full, then that would be a good sign of fatigue for sure. Often what happens too is like you try and accelerate into, and that's why I sort of asked about intensity and how that's going. If you're trying to do hill intervals or you're trying to do thresholdy intervals and your heart rate doesn't come up very easily, like it's normal to have some lag time in heart rate, but if like you're getting through the whole workout and it's not coming up, then that's a very chronic or like classic sign of even just overtraining or overreaching. You just need recovery. What was my other thought with that?
Oh, I guess actually here's another question to that then.
Oh, more questions.
Yeah,
I didn't even
so
finish my thought.
if I decide I have actual fatigue, or even I'm just like, okay, I'm so unmotivated, I'm done, is the best response to that to like just ease up and spin home easy, actually complete the hours or anything like that? Or is it to, take the fastest route home spinning or call an Uber, or do I finish the ride?
So I recalled the other thing I wanted to say was that you should have a plan. And often where the like laziness or fatigue can sometimes come in is if there isn't really like a point to what you're doing, then it's very hard. You're getting tired, you're getting hungry, you're close to home, you're getting bored. Sometimes just riding for extended periods is boring. So if there isn't really a goal, and that goal could be to complete a loop or ride longer than you did or ride the loop faster, sometimes that's like the purpose, and it always comes back to that nebulous why, right? So sometimes just not having a plan is part of the issue, right? And then I sometimes struggle with that and have to sort of like make sure that I'm planning my training or consult with someone and get some ideas and stuff to sort of freshen stuff up. Because sometimes it's just you ride the same roads every single day and you do the same thing every single day. And so it's not that you're lazy, but you're becoming mentally fatigued, right? You aren't striving towards something. So to your latest question, what should you do? I wouldn't stop necessarily, like unless someone was very overtrained and just like completely like just, you're starting
Fainting on the roadside.
Yeah, I mean, you're seeing like crazy like blood pressure and not sleeping and just crazy irritability and stuff like that. If you're mid-ride, I mean, you could certainly shorten a ride and then go home and assess like, well, what is my training looking like? I'm going to take a couple days easy. But I think that's where you get back to that sort of 30-minute spins, low heart rate, and do that for a few days to even a week. A lot of times you haven't taken a rest week sometimes for people. And that's another question. When was your last rest day or last rest week, right? Again, it gets to that undulation in training, both in the week and the month, if not the year. But yeah, so hopefully, I don't know if that answers that question, but yeah, definitely like just even do something different for a couple days, right? Like that could be a day off. That could be riding easy. That could be riding with people. That could be, a variety of different things, different sport we would love in our consummate athlete ways.
All right, perfect. All right, next one. Someone asked me what saddle I use, and they, asked this because talking about saddles and, bike fit and chamois choice and stuff like that is kind of my jam. I've written an entire book about it, Saddle Sore, Ride Comfortable, Ride Happy. So you'd think that I'd maybe have a saddle recommendation to give people. normally I would have just skipped this question, but because I get asked it every time we do talks, and someone recently asked me, I kind of wanted to address it because there's a reason I never really talk about what saddles that I use. And that's because none of us are exactly the same. So the saddle that works for me is not necessarily going to work for someone else. Even if they happen to be my exact height and weight, that doesn't necessarily mean we have the same sit bones. It doesn't mean we have the same, configuration of our various nether regions, for lack of a better way of putting that. So the saddle that I choose is probably not going to work for somebody else. So I think it's I purposely avoid saying which one I use because I don't want someone to go out and assume that happens to be a great saddle. That happens to be a great saddle for me. And, I've gotten terrible saddles. I've fallen into the trap of riding the saddle that came on my bike for a year before I remembered, oh, right, I have the power to change the saddle. It's really not that hard. So if you are looking for a saddle, recommendations are, fine, well and good. It sometimes helps give you a starting point. But a lot of bike shops will have either money back guarantees on saddles. They'll have saddles that they lend out. You can actually go to a bike shop and get your sit bones measured. So you sit down on this, basically sand pad, and it measures the space between your sit bones, and that can help direct you to a saddle that is properly sized for you. You might find that you prefer a cutout or a divot in your saddle. You might realize you actually really don't like that. You might want a more aggressive saddle. You might want a more relaxed saddle. There are tons of options out there. So rather than asking what saddle I use, thinking about what saddle is going to be right for you is probably a better thing. And whenever a cycling magazine or website has a review of a saddle, take it with a grain of salt because that is one person's nether regions on that saddle.
Yeah, sometimes I guess they do, everyone in the magazine or whatever tries different saddles or something, but yeah, it's definitely finding that saddle. I know Trek has done, and I think a few other brands are doing it like this now too. They're having both that width, but then also based on the riding you do. So they would have an aggressive position for more like a time trial or road, and then maybe there's a mountain bike saddle, and then there's maybe a casual saddle too. And it's sort of based on how far forward you're hinged when you're sitting on the saddle, right? And it makes sort of sense, right? Like a road cyclist is going to be down aerodynamic. So they've rolled their pelvis forward, and those nether regions, as you call them, right? All our sensitive parts are getting sort of rolled onto that saddle. So the aggressive saddles are sort of trying to accommodate for that, right? So maybe a little less nose, or the nose slopes down a bit more. Mm-hmm. So I think that's something that I've seen in the clients I work with, who are, I guess, are more serious in general. Some of those more aggressive saddles, we won't necessarily name models, but certainly Trek, and I know Specialized is a popular one as well. Both have ones that are sort of these more aggressive saddles. And I think for people who are, pushing their limits and racing, then I think that's often what seems to be where people are trending towards, at least right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So I think just trying out different ones.
I think that's great. Yeah, I had never thought, but I guess you could probably go to a shop, and assuming they have bikes with different saddles on the bikes, which they may not have all
It's
models.
Usually cheap stock ones, unfortunately, unless you're getting really, really, really up into the
You may even be able to just go around with your chamois on and then try them out, right?
Yeah, I will. The caveat to that is, unfortunately, a lot of saddles will feel totally fine for the first, 30 minutes or so, or your first ride. It's really only after a week or so of serious riding that you start noticing that, XYZ saddle is not right
for you. Not even
a
week, but definitely takes an hour or two, right? Or at least more than you're used to riding.
Yeah.
Right? Even on my bike, it's been fine because it's a cross bike that I'm riding right now, and it's been fine. I've ridden it since August, but then this week I finally have been pushing my volume up a fair bit. And definitely by ride 5, or hour 4 or 5, I start definitely noticing it, and I've had to tweak things a little bit as far as position. But
Yeah, and actually coming back to that article I'm working on about riding on the trainer inside and setting up your perfect indoor trainer setup, saddles become much more important, I find, actually, when you ride inside because you're much less dynamic. When I'm outside, I can ride for a lot of hours on the current saddle that I have. When I've been on the trainer, I hate it after the first hour, so not all saddles are great for all things.
yeah, and definitely trying to stand up periodically, especially when you're outside, but even inside, just trying to time a couple pedal strokes up out of the saddle here and there.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so that's all about saddles. Next question. And I actually love this one because I think it's something that all of us probably know the answer to, but will ignore the advice. Or ignore the advice if no one is like out there actually telling us this thing. If I miss a day of training, should I make it up?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends. The rule I give people, especially when they're following like a training plan or something, is that if you've missed the day because of something stressful, so work just was like this most stressful day ever, your boss was yelling at you, or like you were up all night with your kids and they were freaking out, then I just say like move on to the next day and just leave that day in the past. It's fine. And you might have to adjust like the next week. If say you were doing 3x10 this week and then next week you're doing 3x12, maybe next week you just ease into that. You don't necessarily have to like jump through it and skip it completely, but maybe that next workout sort of like blended. Maybe there's like maybe it's like a 12 and a 10 and then an 8, or a 12 and 2 10s. As just as a sort of an example. Now, if you're like, it's pouring rain today and I have this like hill workout, or like I know I have Friday off, but like today's Thursday and I have this hill workout, but today I have to work, just normal work. It's not stressful. I know I have to go to work and I have like an hour after work, but I could slam out this awesome hill workout tomorrow, after a good breakfast and like sleep in, and then I'm going to slam out like a 3-hour ride with those hill intervals. It's going to be a really, really good quality session. Then in that case, I would say you could like miss the workout and move it forward, right? And
would you swap the workouts in that case?
Yeah, maybe just spin easy or something, right? And maybe it's, again, like if it's not stressful, but you just can't make it, right? Like it's just, the kids have to go to a birthday party after work. It's not stressful. It's just, I don't have the window I thought I was going to have. But tomorrow I definitely have that window, right? Or I get, a bigger window because I took the kids to the birthday party, right? Like there's certain examples like that where like you're really not stressed. Your sleep's still good. You're still eating meals. It's just there isn't the time in the day. So rather than like staying up at 11 o'clock at night and like trying to slam out this hill interval workout, right? Then sometimes that's the logical thing. And with some of my coaching clients, like that's definitely something we would be back and forth on. But if you're just following a plan, or you're on your own coaching yourself, then those are the decisions you have to make. So that's my rule of thumb, is just if it's stressful, then just sort of like carry on, which usually means you do sort of like maybe a lower intensity or a recovery day after the stressful day.
Yeah. And this actually kind of comes back to almost our first question, but the other thing I'll say about this is, if you're finding that this is happening to you on a weekly basis, or even more than once a week, it might be time to look at your training plan as a whole and actually do a bit of recalibration to where your life is now. I mean, it's one thing if, you're making 95% of your workouts and like 5% get kind of
that's probably
off.
Good, right? Like there should be some adjustment there. It shouldn't fit perfectly.
But if every single week you're finding like 3 workouts just aren't working, or, work is stressful 3 days a week or whatever, it might just be time to rethink your whole your training plan as a whole, not just keep doing this like shift one day, borrow from Peter to pay Paul, not you, Peter. Like,
right. That's
the saying. But, sorry.
Yeah, I think that definitely. I've had a few clients in the last few years. I've seen many more people who are actually taking Sundays, the typical long workout day, taking it off as like the family day, get on top of things day, because they were just getting frustrated and getting there was fights at home and stuff about going away for the whole day, and it's like that's the only day the kids are home and stuff like that. So why not just take that day off and enjoy it? And then Monday to Friday maybe is more predictable. Maybe you can't do 3 hours, but maybe it's, you get your hour every single day or something. And then Saturday is the big long day, and then Sunday you take off. And a lot of people find that they come, they're happy. They had that like relaxing day, they went for a walk, read the paper, whatever, right?
Yeah, a bit more of a refresh.
Yeah. I definitely really like when I have Sundays off.
Yeah.
It's a whole different world.
Absolutely. Awesome. So I think we'll wrap up there. As always, if you could swing over to iTunes, give us a rating or a review, that would be amazing. We would greatly appreciate it. And as we said in the beginning, any questions are always welcome. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Molly J. Herford, and Peter is at Peter Glassford, or you can use our question form over on consummateathlete.com. All right. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next week. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Consummate Athlete podcast. To check out all of the show notes for this show, go to consummateathlete.com, and to follow along with our various adventures on the social medias, you can check us out on Facebook at facebook.com/consummateathlete, or follow me, Molly Herford, at Molly J. Herford on Twitter and Instagram.
And I'm at Peter Glassford on Twitter and Instagram.
And if you could do us a huge favor and rate and review the podcast over on iTunes, that helps us bring on more guests, get more episodes out, and do more cool stuff. So we would be forever grateful.
And if you're looking for coaching for endurance sport or just for health and wellness, you can check out smartathlete.ca. And for amazing outdoor content, you can check out theoutdooredit.com.
Aw, honey.
And that's theoutdooredit.com for Molly Herford's writing and all things outdoors.
All right. Thank you so much for listening, guys, and we'll see you next time.